Bianca's mother was leading her when Rand saw her first. Bianca was squat and small, with dank hair and rotten teeth. Her mouth was crooked and it drooled. Either she was blind or she just didn't care about bumping into things. It didn't really matter because Bianca was an imbecile. Her hands. They were lovely hands, graceful hands, hands as soft and smooth and white as snowflakes, hands whose color was lightly tinged with pink, like the glow of Mars on snow. They lay on the counter side by side, looking at Rand. They lay there half-closed and crouching, each pulsing with a movement like the panting of a field creature. And they looked, not watched. Later, they watched him. Now they looked. They did because Rand felt their united gaze, and his heart beat strongly. Bianca's mother demanded cheese stridently. Rand brought it to her in his own time while she berated him. She was a bitter woman, as any woman has a right to be who is wife of no man and mother to a monster. Rand gave her the cheese and took her money and never noticed that it was not enough, because of Bianca's hands. When Bianca's mother tried to take one of the hands, it scuttled away from the unwanted touch. It did not lift from the counter, but ran on its fingertips to the edge and leaped into a fold of Bianca's dress. The woman took the unresisting elbow and led Bianca out. Rand stayed there at the counter unmoving, thinking of Bianca's hands. Rand was strong and bronze and not very clever. He had never been taught about beauty and strangeness, but he did not need that teaching. His shoulders were wide and his arms were heavy and thick, but he had great soft eyes and thick lashes. They curtained his eyes now. He was seeing Bianca's hands again dreamily. He found it hard to breathe. Harding came back. Harding owned the store. He was a large man whose features barely kept his cheeks apart. He said, "Sweep up, Rand. We're closing early today." Then he went behind the counter, squeezing past Rand. Rand got the broom and swept slowly. "A woman bought cheese," he said suddenly. "A poor woman with very old clothes. She was leading a girl. I can't remember what the girl looked like, except, who was she?" "I saw them go out," said Harding. "The woman is Bianca's mother, and the girl is Bianca. I don't know their other name. They don't talk to people much. I wish they wouldn't come in here. Hurry up, Rand." Rand did what was necessary and put away his broom. Before he left, he asked, "Where do they live, Bianca and her mother?" "On the other side, a house on no road, away from people. Good night, Rand." Rand went from the shop directly over to the other side, not waiting for his supper. He found the house easily, for it was indeed away from the road and stood rudely by itself. The townspeople had cauterized the house by wrapping it in empty fields. Harshly, "What do you want?" Bianca's mother asked as she opened the door. "May I come in?" "What do you want?" "May I come in?" he asked again. She made as if to slam the door, and then stood aside. "Come." Rand went in and stood still. Bianca's mother crossed the room and sat under an old lamp, in the shadow. Rand sat opposite her, on a three-legged stool. Bianca was not in the room. The woman tried to speak, but embarrassment clutched at her voice. She withdrew into her bitterness, saying nothing. She kept peeping at Rand, who sat quietly with his arms folded and the uncertain light in his eyes. He knew she would speak soon, and he could wait. "Ah, well." She sat silent after that, for a time, but now she had forgiven him his intrusion. Then, "It's a great while since anyone came to see me." "A great while." "It was different before. I was a pretty girl." She bit her words off, and her face popped out of the shadows, shriveled and sagging as she leaned forward. Rand saw that she was beaten and cowed and did not want to be laughed at. "Yes," he said gently. She sighed and leaned back so that her face disappeared again. She said nothing for a moment, sitting looking at Rand, liking him. "We were happy, the two of us," she mused, "until Bianca came. He didn't like her, poor thing, he didn't, no more than I do now. He went away. I stayed by her because I was her mother. I'd go away myself, I would, but people know me, and I haven't a penny, not a penny. They'd bring me back to her, they would, to care for her. It doesn't matter much now, though, because people don't want me any more than they want her. They don't." Rand shifted his feet uneasily, because the woman was crying. "Have you room for me here?" he asked. Her head crept out into the light. Rand said swiftly, "I'll give you money each week and I'll bring my own bed and things." He was afraid she would refuse. She merged with the shadows again. "If you like," she said, trembling at her good fortune. "Though why you'd want to. Still, I guess if I had a little something to cook up nice, and a good reason for it, I can make someone real cozy here. But why?" She rose. Rand crossed the room and pushed her back into the chair. He stood over her, tall. "I never want you to ask me that," he said, speaking very slowly. "Here?" She swallowed and nodded. "I'll come back tomorrow with the bed and things," he said. He left her there under the lamp, blinking out of the dimness, folded round and about with her misery and her wonder. People talked about it. People said, "Rand has moved to the house of Bianca'S mother. It must be because—" "Ah," said some. "Rand was always a strange boy. It must be because—" "Oh, no," cried others, appalled. "Rand is such a good boy. He wouldn't—" Harding was told. He frightened the busy little woman who told him. He said, "Rand is very quiet, but he is honest, and he does his work. As long as he comes here in the morning and earns his wage, he can do what he wants, where he wants, and it is not my business to stop him." He said this so very sharply that the little woman dared not say anything more. Rand was very happy living there. Saying little, he began to learn about Bianca'S hands. He watched Bianca being fed. Her hands would not feed her, the lovely aristocrats. Beautiful parasites they were, taking their animal life from the heavy, squat body that carried them, and giving nothing in return. They would lie one on each side of her plate, pulsing, while Bianca'S mother put food into the disinterested, drooling mouth. They were shy, those hands, of Rand's bewitched gaze, caught out there naked in the light and open of the tabletop. They would creep to the edge and drop out of sight, all but 4 rosy fingertips clutching the cloth. They never lifted from a surface. When Bianca walked, her hands did not swing free, but twisted in the fabric of her dress. And when she approached a table or the mantelpiece and stood, her hands would run lightly up and leap, landing together, resting silently, watchfully, with that pulsing peculiar to them. They cared for each other. They would not touch Bianca herself, but each hand groomed the other. It was the only labor to which they would bend themselves. 3 evenings after he came, Rand tried to take one of the hands in his. Bianca was alone in the room, and Rand went to her and sat beside her. She did not move, nor did her hands. They rested on a small table before her, preening themselves. This, then, was when they really began watching him. He felt it, right down to the depths of his enchanted heart. The hands kept stroking each other, and yet they knew he was there. They knew of his desire. They stretched themselves before him, archly, languorously, and his blood pounded hot. Before he could stay himself, he reached and tried to grasp them. He was strong, and his move was sudden and clumsy. One of the hands seemed to disappear, so swiftly did it drop into Bianca's lap. But the other. Rand's thick fingers closed on it and held it captive. It writhed, all but tore itself free. It took no power from the arm on which it lived, for Bianca's arms were flabby and weak. Its strength, like its beauty, was intrinsic, and it was only by shifting his grip to the puffy forearm that Rand succeeded in capturing it. So intent was he on touching it, holding it, that he did not see the other hand leap from the idiot girl's lap, land crouching at the table's edge. It reared back, fingers curling spider-like, and sprang at him, fastening on his wrist. It clamped down agonizingly, and Rand felt bones give and crackle. With a cry, he released the girl's arm. Her hands fell together and ran over each other, feeling for any small scratch, any tiny damage he might have done them in his passion. And as he sat there clutching his wrist, he saw the hands run to the far side of the little table, hook themselves over the edge, and, contracting, draw her out of her place. She had no volition of her own. But her hands had. Creeping over the walls, catching obscure and precarious holds in the wainscoting, they dragged the girl from the room. And Rand sat there and sobbed, not so much from the pain in his swelling arm, but in shame for what he had done. They might have been won to him in another, gentler way. His head was bowed, yet suddenly felt the gaze of those hands. He looked up swiftly enough to see one of them whisk around the doorpost. It had come back then to see. Rand rose heavily and took himself and his shame away. Yet he was compelled to stop in the doorway, even as had Bianca's hands. He watched covertly and saw them come into the room dragging the unprotesting idiot girl. They brought her to the long bench where Rand had sat with her. They pushed her onto it, flung themselves to the table, and began rolling and flattening themselves most curiously about. Rand suddenly realized that there was something of his there, and he was comforted, a little. They were rejoicing, drinking thirstily, reveling in his tears. Afterward, for 19 days, the hands made Rand do penance. He knew them as inviolate and unforgiving. They would not show themselves to him, remaining always hidden in Bianca's dress or under the supper table. For those 19 days, Rand's passion and desire grew. More, his love became true love, for only true love knows reverence. And the possession of the hands became his reason for living, his goal in the life which that reason had given him. Ultimately, they forgave him. They kissed him coyly when he was not looking, touched him on the wrist, caught and held him for one sweet moment. It was at table. A great power surged through him, and he gazed down at the hands, now returned to Bianca's lap. A strong muscle in his jaw twitched, swelled, and fell. Happiness like a golden light flooded him. Passion spurred him. Love imprisoned him. Reverence was the gold of the golden light. The room willed and whirled about him, and forces unimaginable flickered through him. Battling with himself, yet lax in the glory of it, Rand sat unmoving, beyond the world, enslaved and yet possessor of all. Bianca's hands flushed pink, and if ever hands smiled at each other, then they did. He rose abruptly, flinging his chair from him, feeling the strength of his back and shoulders. Bianca's mother, by now beyond surprise, looked at him in a way. There was that in his eyes which she did not like, for to fathom it would disturb her, and she wanted no trouble. Rand strode from the room and outdoors, to be by himself that he might learn more of this new thing that had possessed him. It was evening. The crooked, bending skyline drank the buoyance of the sun, dragged it down, sucking greedily. Rand stood on a knoll, his nostrils flaring, filling the depth of his lungs. He sucked in the crisp air, and it smelled new to him, as though the sunset shades were truly in it. He gnawed at the muscles of his thighs and stared at his smooth, solid fists. He raised his hands high over his head and, stretching, sent out such a great shout that the sun sank. He watched it, knowing how great and tall he was, how strong he was, knowing the meaning of longing and belonging. And then he lay down on the clean earth, and he wept. When the sky grew cold enough for the moon to follow the sun beyond the hills, and still an hour after that, Rand returned to the house. He struck a light in the room of Bianca'S mother, where she slept on a pile of old clothes. Rand sat beside her and let the light wake her. She rolled over to him and moaned, opened her eyes, and shrank from him. "Rand, what do you want?" "Bianca. I want to marry Bianca." Her breath hissed between her gums. "No!" It was not a refusal, but astonishment. Rand touched her arm impatiently. Then she laughed. "To marry Bianca. It's late, boy. Go back to bed, and in the morning you'll have forgotten this thing, this dream." "I've not been to bed," he said patiently, but growing angry. "Will you give me Bianca or not?" She sat up and rested her chin on her withered knees. "You're right to ask me, for I'm her mother. Still and all, Rand, you've been good to us, Bianca and me. You are a good boy, but forgive me, lad, but you're something of a fool. Bianca's a monster. I say it though I am what I am to her. Do what you like, and never a word will I say." "You should have known. I'm sorry you asked me, for you have given me the memory of speaking so to you. I don't understand you, but do what you like, boy." It was to have been a glance, but it became a stare as she saw his face. He put his hands carefully behind his back, and she knew he would have killed her else. "I'll marry her then," he whispered. She nodded, terrified. "As you like, boy." He blew out the light and left her. Rand worked hard and saved his wages, and made one room beautiful for Bianca and himself. He built a soft chair and a table that was like an altar for Bianca's sacred hands. There was a great bed, and heavy cloth to hide and soften the walls, and a rug. They were married, though marrying took time. Rand had to go far afield before he could find one who would do what was necessary. The man came far and went again afterward, so that none knew of it, and Rand and his wife were left alone. The mother spoke for Bianca, and Bianca's hand trembled frighteningly at the touch of the ring, writhed and struggled, and then lay passive, blushing and beautiful. But it was done. Bianca's mother did not protest, for she didn't dare. Rand was happy, and Bianca? Well, nobody cared about Bianca. After they were married, Bianca followed Rand and his two brides into the beautiful room. He washed Bianca and used rich lotions. He washed and combed her hair and brushed it many times until it shone, to make her more fit to be with the hands he had married. He never touched the hands, though he gave them soaps and creams and tools with which they could groom themselves. They were pleased. Once one of them ran up his coat and touched his cheek and made him exultant. He left then and returned to the shop with his heart full of music. He worked harder than ever, so that Harding was pleased and let him go home early. He wandered the hours away by the bank of a brook, watching the sun on the face of the chuckling water. A bird came to circle him, flew unafraid through the aura of gladness about him. The delicate tip of a wing brushed his wrist with the touch of the first secret kiss from the hands of Bianca. The singing that filled him was part of the nature of laughing, the running of water, the sound of the wind in the reeds by the edge of the stream. He yearned for the hands, and he knew he could go now and clasp them and own them, Instead, he stretched out on the bank and lay smiling, all lost in the sweetness and poignance of waiting, denying desire. He laughed for pure joy in a world without hatred, held in the stainless palms of Bianca'S hands. As it grew dark, he went home. All during that nuptial meal, Bianca'S hands twisted about one of his while he ate with the other, and Bianca'S mother fed the girl. The fingers twined about each other and about his own, so that 3 hands seemed to be wrought of one flesh, to become a thing of lovely weight at his arm's end. When it was quite dark, they went to the beautiful room and lay where he and the hands could watch, through the window, the clean, bright stars swim up out of the forest. The house and the room were dark and silent. Ran was so happy that he hardly dared to breathe. A hand fluttered up over his hair, down his cheek, and crawled into the hollow of his throat. Its pulsing matched the beat of his heart. He opened his own hands wide and clenched his fingers, as though to catch and hold this moment. Soon the other hand crept up and joined the first. For perhaps an hour they lay there passive, with their coolness against Rand's warm neck. He felt them with his throat, each smooth convolution, each firm small expanse. He concentrated, with his mind and his heart on his throat, on each part of the hands that touched him, feeling with all his being first one touch and then another, though the contact was there unmoving, and he knew it would be soon now. Soon. As if at a command, he turned on his back and dug his head into the pillow. Staring up at the vague dark hangings on the wall, he began to realize what it was for which he had been working and dreaming so long. He put his head back yet farther and smiled, waiting. This would be possession, completion. He breathed deeply, twice, and the hands began to move. The thumbs crossed over his throat, and the fingertips settled one by one under his ears. For a long moment they lay there, gathering strength. Together then, in perfect harmony, each cooperating with the other, they became rigid, rock-hard. Their touch was still light upon him, still light. No, now they were passing their rigidity to him, turning it to a contraction. They settled to it slowly, their pressure measured and equal. Rand lay silent. He could not breathe now, and did not want to. His great arms were crossed on his chest, his knotted fists under his armpits, his mind knowing a great peace. Soon now. Wave after wave of engulfing, glorious pain spread and receded. He saw a color impossible without light. He arched his back, up, up. The hands bore down with all their hidden strength, and Rand's body bent like a bow, resting on feet and shoulders, up, up. Something burst within him, his lungs, his heart, no matter. It was complete. There was blood on the hands of Bianca'S mother when they found her in the morning in the beautiful room, trying to soothe Rand's neck. They took Bianca away, and they buried Rand, but they hanged Bianca'S mother because she tried to make them believe Bianca had done it. Bianca, whose hands were quite dead, drooping like brown leaves from her wrists.